Now, welcome to part 6 of my story that will, in a way, both carry on the Star Wars sequel trilogy or continue the journey of some of its characters, while also sort of rewriting or undoing the story of the sequels at the same time. Or, as I like to put it, this is a story of how what comes next will change what came before. And if you're new to the story or haven't seen the first several parts yet, I would highly recommend starting with part 1, and if you enjoy it, working your way back to this one. Otherwise, what's going on right now will make absolutely no sense to you, and a link to the playlist can be found in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start by briefly seeing a small, sleek silver shuttle making its way through hyperspace, before we're taken inside that ship into the cockpit, where we see Finn and Mara Jade seated side by side at the controls, and where Finn is punching away at them while he looks over something being displayed on a monitor, his expression a bit worried perhaps. Mara, sensing it, glances at him and says, "So what's wrong? Still upset about us borrowing the shuttle from Dr. Search?" Finn shakes his head and says, "Yeah, I'm not sure you can call it borrowing when you ask while having a hand on your lightsaber." Mara quickly responds, "It's not like it was ignited, and we wouldn't have needed it anyway if the New Republic hadn't needlessly destroyed my ship." Finn then gives her a look that says she's not justifying herself so well, and so she continues, "Dr. Search saved my life, and so we will return it when we're done. I gave my word, just like I also gave my word to you for saving my life, that I'd help you find Ahsoka Tano, and so here we are." Finn, seeing nothing but a genuine look upon her face, gives her a nod of the head as if to say, "You're right, and I'm sorry to doubt." But then his face again grows a bit skeptical or worried when he once again looks at the control panel in front of him. "Speaking of, here we are, you sure about these coordinates? I can't find Malachor on any star chart." "And you're not going to," Mara says back. "After what happened there, the Republic removed it, and Palpatine certainly wasn't about to restore it after he took over." Finn then asks, "Why would they remove it? What exactly happened there?" "A horrible battle between Jedi and Sith, one where nobody was the victor." Finn gives her a look and then comments, "Yeah, seems like a lot of battles between Jedi and Sith end that way." Next thing we know, we're watching as the shuttle comes out of hyperspace above what appears to be a little more than a dreary gray world. We're then taken back into the cockpit where Finn says, "So, that's it?" "Should be," Mara responds. "It's not like I've ever been here before. Not like anyone would want to come here." Finn quickly responds, "Well then, what led Ahsoka here?" Mara gives a slight shrug. "Desperation, most likely. She was probably searching for a way to stop the Sith." "And, she thought she'd find it here?" Finn asks, his eyes locked on the world on the view screen before him, a world they're getting ever closer to. Mara then says, "There's an ancient Sith temple here, one that apparently housed some sort of weapon." "And what, Ahsoka thought she could use it against the Sith?" Mara gives Finn a look as if to say she has no idea, and Finn lets it drop. We're then taken outside the ship and watch as it plunges through the atmosphere and down to a flat, gray-surfaced world below. Soon enough, after skimming across that surface for a ways, they come to a large, gaping hole in it and fly down through, where they immediately come upon what appears to be the shattered remains of a once massive temple that sits upon a battlefield of some sort, but one that seems to have been obliterated by the same explosion that destroyed the temple. We're then once again in the cockpit, where Mara asks Finn if there's anything on the scanners. He punches at the controls before him once again, and after a few seconds he shakes his head and says, "No life signs that I can make out. But there's a lot of interference coming from something down there, a power source of some kind, I think. There's also the remains of a couple ships." He then hits a button, which causes the remains of those two ships, what looks like TIE fighters, to appear on the screen. Mara glances at them and then says, "Advanced TIE fighters. Only Vader and his Inquisitors used them. Looks like they got wrecked beyond the point of repair by some sort of explosion, maybe the one that came from the temple itself, which then means..." Finn then finishes for her, "Which means Ahsoka likely would have died in that blast too, and yet she didn't. I know she didn't." Mara looks like she's having her doubts about all this, but then says, "Can you pinpoint the energy source?" Finn nods his head. "Yeah, I think so." He hits some more buttons. "Looks like it's under the remains of the temple." Mara sighs and says, "Of course it is." That's when we're taken somewhere else in the galaxy, somewhere far, far away, to a world that actually doesn't look all too dissimilar from Malachor, on its surface at least, for it too is little more than a nearly endless sheet of gray nothingness, other than a range of mountains that Ezra Bridger currently walks towards, followed a dozen or so paces behind by Rey. A cold, steady rain also falls from the clouds above. We then hear Rey call out to Ezra, "Why couldn't your friend from before fly us to wherever it is we're going for shelter?" Ezra glances over his shoulder and says, "She would have been happy to fly me there, had I asked. It's you she wasn't so sure about. She felt the same conflict from you that I do." Rey shakes her head and hurries forward to catch up to Ezra. When she's next to him, she says, "I told you, there's no conflict. I'm Rey Skywalker, a Jedi, and I've heard of you, Ezra. You fought for the rebellion with your master, Kanan Jarrus, until you were lost during the Battle of Lothal." Ezra then stops dead in his tracks and mutters to himself, "Lothal. Home." Rey gives a warm smile and nods eagerly as she says, "Like I said, I know you. I know your story, your bravery. You helped liberate Lothal, and the Empire never returned for it. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. Everything started to change after that. Everything started to turn around. The Empire, it fell, and a new Republic has risen to take its place, as has a new Jedi Order, one I'm a part of, one I lead." Ezra then turns and looks at Rey and stares at her face, studying it very carefully for some time before saying, "The name Skywalker is not completely unknown to me. I once knew the apprentice of an Anakin Skywalker. She talked about him from time to time. Kept a holocron of his." Rey again nods. "You're speaking of Ahsoka Tano." Upon hearing that name, Ezra frowns and promptly turns from Rey and starts walking again at a quickened pace. We then hear him grumble, "Don't speak that name. She made a promise to me, and she failed to keep it." Rey then hurries to keep up with him and says, "What happened to you? How did you get to this place, this world?" Ezra looks at her and says, "I could ask you the exact same questions. How did you get here, Rey? And what happened to you? It's like..." Again, Ezra studies her face very carefully. "It's like whoever you are or were doesn't understand that someone or something else is in control now." Rey then looks genuinely confused and shakes her head as if that makes no sense whatsoever. Ezra continues, "I believe that you believe that you're Rey Skywalker, and maybe in some way you still are. But there are other voices in there, so many other voices. It's like this cacophony of madness and anger. But there's also one voice that rises above the others, one that keeps you, the real you, completely lost." Rey then shakes her head and smiles, but it's the type of smile that tries to mask fear and or uncertainty. Before she can say anything, it's Ezra who asks, "Tell me, how did you get here?" Rey again gives this sort of awkward smile before shaking her head and saying, "I don't exactly remember." "And that doesn't concern you?" Ezra asks. "It does. It should anyway," Rey responds, looking as if she truly knows that it should, and yet it doesn't. She then asks, "What about you? How did you get here?" Ezra once again studies her face carefully before saying, "I was brought here by Purgil, or should I say abandoned here by them after the Battle of Lothal." Rey thinks a moment and says, "Purgil? I've heard of them. Aren't they just giant space nuisances? I don't understand." "Neither do I," Ezra quickly responds, looking frustrated. "I'm not sure why exactly they brought me here, other than this place is incredibly strong with the Force." Rey looks curious, and so Ezra continues, "The strange creatures of this world even call me the Keeper, like there's something here, something I'm supposed to, I don't know, protect maybe? But I've never figured out what that might be." Rey then takes a moment to look all around before saying, I don't feel that the Force is all that strong here. I barely feel the presence of it at all, other than from some of those strange creatures that you rode. In fact, it's almost like my senses are pulled to them, and only to them. There's nothing else here, nothing at all." Ezra then smiles almost a little apologetically at Rey before saying, "I told you before that I'm connected to the living Force in a way that few others are, or maybe have ever been." He again looks all around, a rather odd expression on his face as he concludes, "I can feel something in the living Force here that you're probably unable to." For a brief moment then, while Ezra is looking away, Rey's face darkens and she says, "What could you possibly sense that I would be unable to?" Ezra then quickly looks at her, clearly having heard the sudden change in her voice, but instead of seeing a dark expression there, he sees the opposite. He sees someone who looks innocent and just curious. Ezra once again takes a long moment to study her face before saying, "I know it might not look like it, but of all the places I've ever been, never have I felt somewhere with so much life and light. That's when we're taken back across the galaxy, back to Malachor, where Mara Jade and Finn stand at the base of what is essentially a gigantic mound of rubble that used to be a Sith temple. We then hear Mara say, "Of all the places I've been across this galaxy, never have I felt somewhere so full of death and darkness." Finn then comments, looking at it, "Well, it certainly does look the part." Mara takes a moment to glare at him before the two then keep moving, skirting around the edge of this massive debris pile until they come to an area where, for some reason, the debris looks as if it was cleared away to reveal a set of steps leading down to a dark tunnel. Mara studies the debris around it for a bit and, after making some quiet comments about how odd this all is, she then says, "It looks like this tunnel may have been hidden until the explosion that leveled the temple." Finn then pretends to intently study the debris for a few moments, wondering how she came to that conclusion, and then he says, his eyes focusing on the dark tunnel, "And what, you think Ahsoka went down there? And that she's still down there after all this time?" Mara responds, "Well, it does lead down to whatever this energy source is, where it's coming from." Finn then quickly says, "That's assuming she's even still on Malachor." Mara then starts heading down the steps and says, "Only one way to find out, I suppose." Finn, however, doesn't follow and instead says, "I got a bad feeling about this one." Mara sighs and looks over her shoulder at him and responds, "Then stay here if you're afraid." "Afraid? I'm not afraid, it's just that..." Mara doesn't wait for him to explain, and instead she walks down the steps and towards the tunnel, and after a few more moments of indecision, Finn follows her down into the darkness. Which is when we're once again taken to the other side of the galaxy, back to where Ezra and Rey are walking across a desolate gray landscape, a steady rain still falling, and the two are drawing ever closer to a mountain range, but it's something before those mountains that has only recently started to take shape that has interested Rey, and seems to also be where they're actually headed, and not to the mountains beyond like she originally thought. At first, she believed them to be nothing more than rocks, large, jagged boulders stretched a great distance in a line across the ground. But now that they're getting closer, she wonders if they're something else entirely, and so she says to Ezra, "Are those the remains of a Star Destroyer?" Ezra gives a nod of the head and says, "The Chimera, to be exact." "Chimera," Rey repeats. She thinks only a moment before saying, "Of course, that was Thrawn's ship." Ezra glances at Rey and says, "So you've heard of him then? Heard of Thrawn?" Rey nods eagerly, almost too eagerly for Ezra's liking, and says, "Of course I've heard of him. He was Palpatine's greatest military mind. Losing him was an incredible loss for the Empire. May even be why they ultimately lost the war." Ezra eyes her curiously again and says, "So he never returned to the Empire then, after he escaped here?" Rey responds, her eyes on the Star Destroyer wreckage in the distance. "Escaped here? How did he survive the crash to even have a chance at escape? And how did you survive, for that matter?" Ezra shakes his head, but not in an effort to forget about what happened, but as if trying to convey how little sense it all makes to him. He then explains. "We were together on the bridge, Thrawn and I, during the Battle of Lothal when the Purrgil took us away, jumped us into hyperspace. But it wasn't like a normal jump, at least as far as I can remember. It felt almost instantaneous, like one moment we were above Lothal, and next we were here." Ezra looks to the stretch of debris and finishes, "We were on the Star Destroyer, no power left, plunging towards the ground, and the Purrgil were gone, just gone without a trace." Rey shakes her head. "I don't understand. How did you not die? How did you both not die?" Ezra sighs and says, "The rest of the crew, they all died. But Thrawn and I, well, I was able to, shift us to another reality, to take us to another place in time and space, to a world between worlds, I guess you could call it." Rey looks simply amazed, at a loss for words even, and so Ezra continues, "When it was over, I brought us back, but I could only come back to here, to this world the Purrgil had brought me to. In time, I started to learn how to control this power somewhat, to open a portal to this world between the worlds. But no matter what exit I took, it always led me back to here and now, like this is where I had to be for some reason." Ezra lets out a heavy sigh and continues, "For some time then, Thrawn and I worked together to survive. We almost became friends, even. Or so I thought. But as soon as he was able to get the communication array working again, he called out to his people, to the Chiss Ascendancy, And when they came for him, he left me behind, or should I say he thought he'd killed me. There's genuine sadness on Ezra's face as he continues. He apologized before he did it, before he shot me in cold blood. Ezra then lifts up his shirt, revealing a long since healed blaster wound in the middle of his chest. His hand goes to it as he says, more to himself than anything, I think this place somehow saved and healed me. Ezra then lets his shirt drop and again looks at Rey as he says, Thrawn said he couldn't allow me to live because of what I could do, the danger he saw in it, in being able to access this world between the worlds where things could be changed. Ezra shakes his head rather wistfully and finishes, in truth, I could tell it all just terrified him. The Force and all that can be done with it, Thrawn begrudgingly accepts that, and he can still make some sense of it, process, and predict it to some degree, but the idea that a place existed where things in the past could be undone and changed completely, it was just wholly rejected by his mind. His brilliance refused to concede to such an impossibility, and so he only wanted to eradicate it. After Ezra finally falls silent, Rey almost hesitantly asks, Why are you telling me all this? Ezra, his face suddenly devoid of any and all emotion, says back, To try and reach the real you, Rey, to help you remember, to help you fight against him. Rey shakes her head in confusion. I don't understand. Maybe you don't, Ezra begins, but Palpatine sure does. Isn't that right? In a flash, all the confusion on Rey's face is washed away, replaced by a smile going from ear to ear as she says, You're a fool, Ezra Bridger, one who shall pay the price for his boldness. Ezra then snickers and responds, There you are. I was wondering how long you were going to play pretend. Rey responds, It appears I was not the only one to play pretend. Ezra gives a bit of a smug grin. Come on, of course I knew it was you from the start. I was just curious how much of this Rey Skywalker still existed, how much of her was left, and how much you were willing to let her hear. Rey replies, I told you, there is no conflict within me. Rey Skywalker is no more. But Ezra shakes his head. Yeah, I don't believe that. I think I was talking to the real Rey. That you're able to use her like a mask somehow. But she's still in there. And that you two are hardly alone in there too, it seems. Ezra takes a step forward and studies Rey yet again. But it's like he's trying to look past her now, or within her. He then says, Just what is going on in there? And how did you really get here? Rey responds, Your future self sent me here. Ezra frowns. Well, remind me to not thank myself later for that one. And if that is the case, if whatever, sent you here, there must be a reason. But before either can say anything else, there's a giant explosion not far from where they're both standing, followed by another, and both Rey and Ezra quickly realize that it's coming from above, that streaks of green laser fire are raining down upon them, and soon the ground beneath their feet begins to crack, and eventually it gives way entirely, and Ezra plunges down into the darkness below. Which is when we're taken way above the planet, into orbit, where we see it's an Imperial Star Destroyer that's raining hell down upon them, and on the bridge of that ship, hands locked behind his back as he looks on, is Grand Admiral Thrawn. After some time has gone by, the commander we've seen before, the last time we were aboard this ship, hesitantly approaches him and says, Admiral, the entire area has been obliterated. Thrawn, looking as calm and cool as collected as ever, simply replies, Very good, Commander. Now keep firing, and prepare team to head down to the surface for confirmation. The commander glances out the viewport, looks at what is essentially a small firestorm on the surface of the planet, and says, Yes, of course, as you wish, Admiral. That's when we're taken back to Malachor, to a long, winding and twisting staircase down into the darkness under the Sith Temple, where both Finn and Mara Jade hold aloft ignited blue lightsabers to light their way, and where we hear Finn say, How far down do you think this goes? But Mara only shakes her head in response and raises a finger to her lips, telling him to keep quiet. After several more steps in silence, the stairs now end, and the narrow tunnel they were in opens into what seems to be a large chamber, though it's hard to be sure just how large it is, since the light from the sabers only reaches so far into the darkness. But as they walk into the room, soft, muddy ground at their feet, they soon find scattered throughout it are massive, ancient, gnarled old trees that have long since died. And carved into the bark of one of these trees that Mara and Finn now stand by are strange symbols. Is that some kind of ancient Sith language? Finn asks, looking at the symbols. Mara nods and says back, "It is. Palpatine had several relics with symbols just like these on them. But I have no idea how to read it." The two then fall silent and freeze when they both see movement out of the corner of their eyes, darting to and from some of the trees. And as they slowly turn to look, they begin to see more and more movement, as if the darkness itself is coming to life and taking shape. And that shape is of dozens, if not hundreds, of dark-clad figures that begin to encircle them. Finn, his grip on his ignited saber tightening, asks, What are they? Ghosts or spirits of some kind? Dead Sith coming back to haunt this place?" Mara gives him a quick, almost irritated look and says, "That's impossible. That's not how the Force works. The dead are just that. They are dead and gone. There's a reason why Sith seek immortality, because they think or know nothingness awaits them after this life." But Finn quickly says, "If that's true, how did Palpatine come back from the dead? What kind of dark science could that be?" Mara gives Finn a look as if to ask, what in the heck is dark science? That's when Finn says, "All I know is he came back somehow, and he's still back. He's still possessing Rey." Mara says nothing, and so Finn continues, "And what about me, huh? How am I even here, from the future? Maybe no one knows just how the Force works." That's when a voice echoes from out of the darkness and says, "Truer words have never been spoken, for none could ever begin to understand all there is to learn about the Force, be they Jedi or Sith. Though some have seen the great mystery that is the Force from both sides, and have a better understanding than most." Some of the dark figures surrounding Mara and Finn begin to part, making way for a lone, shadowy, masked figure to make their way towards them. And as soon as this figure is close enough to be seen clearly with the light given off by the blue sabers, Mara looks at the masked figure, and her mouth opens in amazement as she mutters one word: Revan. That's when we're once again taken to the other side of the galaxy, to the planet where Ezra has spent many long years of his life trapped upon, though in all that time he has only ever been upon its dreary surface, whereas now he has fallen far, far below it, and is unconscious in some type of vast, enormous underground cavern that is full of life of all kinds, from large, lush, green plants and trees to all sorts of strange, wondrous animals of different shapes and sizes, all of which are illuminated by an unseen light source that makes it as bright as the noonday. And as Ezra sleeps in a patch of tall grass, a large wolf, a loth wolf perhaps, approaches him and nudges at him, trying to wake him up. And as Ezra's eyes slowly flutter open, the wolf begins to fade away, uttering one single word as it does: doom. Hearing that word causes Ezra to instantly be fully awake, and he looks around in shock as he sees he's not only apparently still alive, but that he's in some strange place overflowing with life. When he gets to his feet and quickly brushes himself off, he suddenly hears a voice behind him, and whirls around to see a figure dressed in white robes and wearing a mask, who says, "Welcome, Keeper. My name is Revan, and we have much to discuss." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.